Greetings from Boston. We have some unfortunate news coming out of Acapulco. Rafael Nadal has decided to withdraw from the 2018 Mexican Open, where he had 300 points to defend. Rafa is complaining of a leg injury, some leg pain, possibly relating to the hip. He's been struggling with the same basic problem at least since the 2018 Australian Open about a month ago, and he's had now about 5 weeks to recover and rehabilitate, but it's apparently not quite been enough. He only has one more week until Indian Wells, and it's becoming, to be frank, less likely that Rafa is going to participate in Indian Wells based on his decision yesterday, because it's unlikely that this injury is going to resolve itself in the period of a week if it couldn't resolve itself in 5 weeks. So I want to talk about that. I want to kind of put this in the context of the discussion that we're having about the older generation dominating. Some better and happier news coming out of Monaco is that Roger Federer has won the Laureus World Sports Awards for Sportsman and Comeback of the Year. He made a really good speech that referenced Rafael Nadal and their rivalry, and that's a happier piece of news. Another issue or development that we should note is that Grigor Dimitrov was shocked in the first round of the Dubai tournament by an individual not even in the top 100, and Dimitrov has been certainly struggled against Federer in Rotterdam. He was the top seed at Dubai, so that is about the biggest kind of upset that you can have at the Dubai tournament, the #1 seed out in the first round. So I want to talk about Rafa. I want to talk about that decision. I want to talk about the consequences of Rafa's decision point-wise for Federer, and to situate it in this context of the older generation dominating. Subscribe to the channel. We have lots of great videos coming up. We have commentary, of course, on the Mexican Open. We will continue to follow. I've got my eye on Kevin Anderson, who appears to be one of these older guys who is coming out of the woodwork and doing very well. He just won the New York Open, and we'll see how he fares in Acapulco. See my last video for an additional discussion of the draw in Acapulco. But for now, let's talk about Nadal. Is it over for Nadal? What do you think? Drop a comment and let me know. I mean, I looked at his sort of history of injuries. The injuries started sort of in earnest for Nadal in 2014. He had to skip the American leg of the tour with a wrist injury. He also had the appendicitis, which was a little bit surprising. And in 2015, it was kind of a limp year, but 2016, of course, is the one that really gave him problems. He had to skip the French Open, oh my gosh, and Wimbledon as well. Had to have that wrist recovery, but again, he came back in 2017 and had a stellar year, absolutely stellar. The problem is he was not able to sustain it, and of course at the tour finals he lost in the round robin stage. Apparently he was having an injury problem. He didn't retire from the match, but there was an injury that was giving him problems, and then of course at the 2018 Australian Open he has to retire from his match with Marin Cilic, and then now after 5 weeks it's not been enough, and he still has this continuing problem. Well, it raises questions about his ability to recover and whether his body is recovering as quickly as it used to, or is able to recover as quickly as it used to. And this again kind of connects up with this discussion about what we're having with the older players. I've noted the phenomenon, which is that the older players are in fact in the top 20 to a much greater extent than they ever have been in history. But on the other hand, viewers like Josh Van He and actually myself, I talked about this in the last video. I mean, we are in a time of flux. Things could change. I said in my last video, as soon as 6 months from now, we could see a completely different composition of the top 20. If there are enough injuries, if the Cilices and the Delpos, for example, it might be the beginning of the end for them as well. We're just going to have to kind of see how things play out, or the older people could consolidate. But whatever happens there, of course, Federer is kind of in a league of his own. I mean, he's much older than all of the other competitive players, but also his particular longevity can be explained with factors that actually don't apply to the other players. So unlike Rafa, he's doing an abbreviated schedule, right? Last year in 2017, Federer didn't play as many matches as Rafa did, skipped the clay court season entirely, and has been, abbreviating his schedule to some degree for even the couple of years prior to his comeback. But the other factor, of course, with Roger is his remarkably efficient style of play that is, again, very singular with Roger, and that explains why, as an older guy, he could continue to dominate. But then finally, and this is the one that we kind of developed in some comments to the last video, but there's the psychological component, the mental component, and that's where I think Roger is distinguishing himself. And that, of course, isn't subject to the forces of the flesh, the physiological kind of entropy, the physiological wear and tear that the players go through as they get older. No, the psychological component can maybe get better with age, like a fine wine, right? Or maybe that's not the right metaphor, but again, it can get stronger, more intense, and that's where Roger really distinguishes himself. And what I was saying in the comments that were kind of prompted on by another couple of insightful comments made by viewers is that, yeah, his comeback in 2017, I think, was primarily psychological. It was a mental comeback, and that's where remember, the injury he suffered was not on the court that really put him out for the rest of the season, but he was bathing his children, so it was something at home. I think it was a mental and psychological issue that he was struggling with, and he needed to take time away from the sport to rehabilitate psychologically, to get fresh perspective, to re-intensify the mental component of his game. And maybe there was some psychotherapy in effect over the course of his time off. But again, the mental game, that's what separates Federer, his mental focus, his willpower, and that's not subject to age. So to the extent that tennis is becoming more about willpower, more about that psychological component, well, maybe it makes sense that the older players would do better, but it certainly explains Roger Federer's case because he is a master of the psychological component of the game. Finally, let's talk just a little bit about the point implications of the Nadal decision. So I do think it's improbable that he's going to play Indian Wells, but if he does, whether he'll be able to turn in a good performance, it's questionable because, again, he's only going to have a week. He's going to need to spend time resting and recovering rather than playing and warming up for the tournament, so it's unlikely he's going to go very deep into the Indian Wells tournament. So in terms of the point consequences, if Rafa does not play in Indian Wells, there's going to be a 690-point difference between Federer and Nadal, and Federer actually could hang himself even if that happens, if he doesn't perform well at Indian Wells. He has an enormous task ahead of him. He's got tons of points to defend. It's all kind of downside for Federer if he's not performing well, so he needs to win Indian Wells, folks. That is so very important. It's much more important, in fact, than winning Miami for purposes of consolidating this #1 position for himself. There are a number of scenarios where, a fairly good performance from Rafa combined with a less than stellar performance from Federer at Indian Wells could be enough to strip Federer of the #1, at least temporarily. The Dubai decision turns out to be a very sage decision. It was a good decision. It was the right thing to do because now Federer is going to be fresh. He is going to be renewed, rehabilitated, ready to go. He'll have that psychological perspective that he needs coming into Indian Wells because he really does need to perform. So those are my 2 cents on these events. A lot of exciting tennis coming up. We're going to be covering, I've got videos in the hopper that I'm working on that I'm really excited about, and one about Djokovic. We need to talk about Djokovic. He's a big question mark, and he is someone that, again, if he comes back in full form, and he's got at least one comeback in him, if Nadal has a couple of comebacks, you know, I think Djokovic has at least got one, so he's going to be back. Whether he'll be back at number one, I don't know. That's what Agassi said, I think, but he's a little biased probably. But whether he's going to be back, we'll have to see, but certainly back and probably winning a Grand Slam or two. So we'll just have to see. We've got exciting events that are happening right now in Acapulco. Also, I think to a lesser degree in Dubai. Subscribe to the channel. We've got all the essential commentary. Go down to the comments, make a comment, check out these fascinating discussions that we're conducting with some really smart people from all over the world, which is just great to see. I love this international component of tennis. We all come together around our common love of tennis, around our common love of Federer and the great players. So let's continue this. Subscribe to the channel. Give the video a thumbs up if you like what you see and hear. Be well. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.